One of the most horrific and violent incidents in Arizona history took place at Skeleton Cave, which is tucked away in the rocks above the Salt River between Canyon Lake and Apache Lake. History isn't always bright. Throughout human history, some of the darkest moments have been extremely grim. Arizona's history is no exception. Lieutenant Colonel George Crook of the US 5th Cavalry conducted the first significant battle of the Tonto Basin Campaign, which is also known as the Skeleton Cave Massacre or the Battle of Salt River Canyon. Acting on misinformation that an anti-reservation Apache chief he was pursuing was hiding in Skeleton Cave with his warriors, General Crook made a decisive move. Haunted and frightened, Humuthia revealed the cave's location to Captain James Burns. On a cold morning on December 28, 1872 at first light, a company of 130 soldiers led by Captain William H. Brown and Apache scout Nantaje marched toward the cave. The soldiers fired at a small group huddled around a fire in front of the cave, killing at least 6. Surprised yells from the warriors inside the cave were met with arrows shot in the general direction of the U.S. soldiers, who remained safely behind rocks. The Yavapai, according to Captain John Bourke, reacted to the order to surrender with a cry of anger and defiance, warnings of what was ahead for us, and shouts of joy at the idea that none of us should ever see another day. Brown positioned his forces with half in reserve behind the skirmish line. The men on the front line were ordered to fire rapidly, aiming at the roof of the cave to have the bullets ricochet down among those hiding behind the rock rampart. This tactic worked remarkably well. The ricocheting bullets hit the victims inside. The cries of the scared youngsters and the injured proved how successful the indirect fire was. A death chant began, described by Bourke as a strange, haunting sound, a mix of wail and exultation, the frenzy of despair, and a wild cry for revenge. During the battle, a 4-year-old boy ran to the mouth of the cave and stood there, thumb in his mouth, staring in speechless wonder and indignation at the firing guns, Bourke wrote. Bullets flew past his head almost instantly, sending him sprawling to the ground. Nantaje rushed forward and dragged the boy to safety amidst the cheers of the soldiers, who briefly stopped firing before resuming with renewed intensity. The Yavapai's resistance ended when Troop G of the 5th Cavalry appeared on the overlook above the cave, throwing rocks and shooting at the Native Americans hiding below. Screams of the dying pierced the dust and rose into the air, only to be met with silence. The death chant had ceased, no rifles fired back, and the cave became a tomb. As the troops moved forward, Bourke recalled the situation. Men and women lay dead or writhed in agony, and some newborns were among them, slain either by the torrent of boulders and stones that had fallen from above or by our glancing shots. Humuthia, later adopted by Captain Burns and known as Mike Burns, recounted the end of the massacre. My people thought they were well protected and couldn't see to shoot at the soldiers, but the soldiers were ordered to fire volleys of bullets behind the big boulders, causing the cave walls to scatter glancing bullets into the people beneath. The showers of lead shattered the people so completely they could not be recognized as human. The war song ceased. The scouts rushed into the cave after the final shots were fired and reported that all the men were dead. Any surviving women and children were spared and given to the soldiers, who took them to Fort Grant. Brown and his men then put away their carbines, leaving the dead where they lay. The battle had lasted about 4 hours. The skeletons in the cave were left unburied for more than 50 years. It is stated that the name Skeleton Cave originated from the heaps of bones within and the putrid smell that persisted there for years. A visitor testified 61 years later that the dead people's disintegrating bleached bones were still within and surrounding the cave. One survivor was a little infant who had almost drowned beneath the body of his deceased mother. He went up to become a famous doctor and Yavapai people leader. He was raised by a rich Easterner who funded his schooling after being adopted by a Maricopa woman. He was Mike Burns's cousin and goes by the fictitious name Dr. Carlos Montezuma. The number of Yavapai slain and the number of survivors are still disputed in contemporary chronicles. According to an application for the National Register of Historic Places, the uneven casualty ratio justifies the term massacre in the nomination. Their figures indicate 54 dead and 20 captured. During Crook's winter campaign of 1872 to 1873, the attack against the Yavapai at Skeleton Cave proved to be the most decisive and destructive in terms of casualties.